My name is Cora Wells. For as long as I can remember, my life has been written in stone and soil. I'm a geologist, a title that feels less like a profession and more like a fundamental part of my being. My hands are rarely pristine. There's usually a fine layer of dust under my nails, a smudge of clay on my cheek. My office, if you can call it that, is the vast, breathing expanse of the Pacific Northwest, with its jagged peaks, whispering forests, and secrets held deep within the Earth's crust. I live in Havenwood, a small city nestled in the foothills of the Cascades, a place where the scent of pine and damp earth hangs in the air like a permanent, comforting perfume. For 12 years, I shared that life with Leo. When we met, I was drawn to his light. He was all polished surfaces and brilliant smiles, a man who worked in public relations and could spin words into gold. Where I saw geological strata, he saw narratives. Where I found solace in silence, he thrived in the symphony of human connection. We were, I thought, a perfect study in contrasts, the earth and the sky, each grounding and elevating the other. He loved to tell people I was his brilliant, wild-hearted scientist, a description that always felt more like a brand than a term of endearment. In the early years, our differences were a source of fascination. He'd listen, or seem to listen, as I explained the crystalline structure of quartz or the slow, inexorable drift of continents. I, in turn, would marvel at his ability to walk into a room of strangers and leave with a dozen new friends. But over time, a subtle shift occurred, a fault line forming deep beneath the surface of our marriage. The quiet dinners became quieter. His questions about my work grew perfunctory, his gaze distant when I'd spread my topographical maps across the living room floor. I became, I see now, a project he had completed, an interesting story he had already told. The silence between us was no longer companionable, it was the sound of a chasm widening. I tried to ignore it, pouring myself into my work with a singular focus that had always been my refuge. And then I found it. Deep in a forgotten network of caves I'd been charting for years, a discovery that would not only redefine my career, but also the regional economy. It was a staggering deposit of rhodium and celestine, rare earth minerals essential for next-generation technology. The find wasn't about money for me, it was about the pure, unadulterated thrill of uncovering a secret the Earth had kept for millennia. It was a validation of every long day, every cold night, every moment of solitary, patient study. When I told Leo, his reaction surprised me. His eyes, which had so often seemed to look past me, lit with a fire I hadn't seen in years. "Cora, this is incredible," he'd said, his voice brimming with genuine excitement. "We have to celebrate. Let's go out to the site together, just the two of us. Like we used to." A fragile, foolish hope bloomed in my chest. Perhaps this was it. Perhaps this monumental discovery was something we could share, a new foundation upon which we could rebuild. I agreed, my heart lighter than it had been in years. He planned the trip with meticulous care, packing a gourmet picnic and a bottle of expensive champagne. I packed my geological hammer, sample bags, and survey equipment. The drive into the mountains was beautiful, the late autumn sun casting a golden glow on the Douglas firs and turning the vine maples into flames of scarlet and orange. We talked, really talked, for the first time in what felt like an eternity. He asked about the specific mineral formations, and I, eager to believe in his renewed interest, explained everything with the passion of a professor to her most promising student. We parked at a trailhead marked by a weathered wooden sign and began the hike. The air grew cooler, sharper, scented with pine and the clean, metallic tang of the nearby creek. Leo carried a large, heavy-looking backpack, while mine was light with just the essentials. "I brought extra gear," he explained with a smile. "You never know. Always be prepared, right?" I smiled back, mistaking his preparation for care. The entrance to the cave system was a dark slash in a moss-covered rock face, partially hidden by ferns. The locals called it Whisperwind Caverns, a name that seemed to capture the hushed, ancient quality of the place. Inside, the air was still and cool, carrying the scent of damp stone and minerals. We switched on our headlamps, their beams cutting through the profound darkness. It's just through here, I said, my voice echoing slightly. I led him through a narrow passage that opened into a larger chamber. The walls shimmered, laced with veins of calcite that glittered like frozen waterfalls. My heart began to pound with that familiar, exhilarating rhythm of discovery. There, I whispered, pointing my light toward a dark, metallic seam running through the far wall. That's it. Pure rhodium. I knelt, my hands trembling slightly as I chipped away a small sample. It was even richer than my initial tests had indicated. I was so lost in the moment, in the sheer wonder of it, that I didn't notice Leo stepping back. I didn't hear the subtle shift in his breathing, the careful, deliberate placement of his feet. Cora, he called, his voice unnaturally soft. Come look at this. I turned, carefully placing my sample in a labeled bag. What is it? He was standing near the entrance to the chamber, his silhouette framed against the passage we'd just come through. The smile on his face didn't reach his eyes. It was a placid, unnerving mask. Just come here. Trust me. A cold prickle of unease traced its way down my spine, but I pushed it away. I walked toward him, my boots crunching on the gravel floor. He reached for me, pulling me into an embrace. His arms were tight, unyielding. I do love you, you know, he whispered, his lips close to my ear. The words felt rehearsed, hollow. I just wish things could have been different. Leo, what are you talking about? I tried to pull back, but his grip was like iron. He looked at me then, his eyes dark and empty, reflecting my own confused face back at me. I'm sorry, Cora. The push was sudden and brutally efficient. It sent me stumbling backward, my head connecting with the cavern wall with a sickening thud. Stars exploded behind my eyes. Before I could even draw a breath to scream, he had turned and was scrambling back toward the cave's entrance. Disoriented, I pushed myself up, my vision swimming. Leo, I shouted, my voice raw. I staggered after him, my legs unsteady. That's when I heard the first ominous sound, a deep, grating crack from above, near the mouth of the cave. It was followed by another, and then a deafening, thunderous roar as the entrance collapsed in a suffocating avalanche of rock, dirt, and splintered timber. I ran, my hands outstretched, until they met a solid, unmoving wall of debris. I pounded my fists against it, screaming his name until my throat was shredded and raw. Leo, what have you done? For a moment, there was only silence. Then his voice came through the rock, muffled and terrifyingly calm. You always belonged to the earth more than to me, Cora. Now you can be with it forever. And then, nothing. The sound of his footsteps faded, leaving me in a darkness that was more than just the absence of light. It was a heavy, physical presence, a crushing weight of betrayal and despair. He had planned it all. The picnic, the kind words, the heavy backpack filled not with safety gear, but with tools to bring down a mountain. He hadn't just left me, he had entombed me. I sank to the floor of the cavern, the silence pressing in, broken only by the slow, steady drip of water somewhere in the darkness, each drop counting out the seconds of my new, buried life. I don't know how long I lay on the cold stone floor, adrift in a sea of shock and grief. Time loses its familiar shape in absolute darkness. It stretches and compresses, moments becoming eternities. My mind, a frantic engine, replayed every moment of our life together, searching for the signs I'd missed, the subtle cracks in his charming facade. His impatience, his disinterest, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes when he looked at me. It was all there, a map of his deceit I had refused to read. Finally, a primal instinct for survival pierced through the fog of despair. I fumbled for my headlamp, my fingers stiff and clumsy. The beam flickered to life, a fragile spear of light against the oppressive dark. I took stock. My small backpack contained half a bottle of water, 3 protein bars, my geological hammer, and the precious samples. A day trip's worth of supplies. Not enough. My light swept across the cavern, illuminating the glistening, wet walls and the cruel, impassable wall of rubble that had been the entrance. And then, the beam caught something that wasn't rock. Movement. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. About 30 feet away, standing in the shadows at the edge of my light, was a figure. Tall and lean, with broad shoulders and a stillness that seemed as ancient as the cave itself. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild drum in the suffocating silence. Who's there? My voice was a broken rasp. The figure stepped forward slowly, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. He moved with a quiet, deliberate grace. "Easy now," he said, his voice low and calm, absorbing the echoes of the cave. "I'm not going to hurt you." He came into the full circle of my light. He wore durable, well-worn clothes, a canvas jacket, faded work pants, and sturdy boots. A thick, dark beard framed a face that was weathered but kind, with eyes that were startlingly clear and observant. In one hand, he held an old-fashioned oil lantern, its gentle flame casting a warm, flickering glow. "My name is Silas," he said, his gaze steady. "And I think you and I might have the same problem." I scrambled back, pressing myself against the damp wall, my headlamp still fixed on him. "How did you get in here?" "The entrance is gone." "There's another way," he said, gesturing with his head toward a narrow fissure in the back of the chamber I hadn't noticed. "A much older way. It's how this mountain breathes." You live here?" The question sounded absurd as soon as I voiced it. A faint, sad smile touched his lips. "You could say that. I've been keeping to the quiet places for a few years now. It's safer this way." He took a step closer to the rockfall, his expression hardening as he studied it. "I heard the blast. Your husband, he didn't just block the entrance. He used timbers to collapse the most unstable section. He knew what he was doing." His eyes met mine. "He's not coming back for you." The bluntness of his words should have hurt, but instead, they felt like a clean, sharp truth in a world that had become a nightmare of lies. "He tried to kill me," I whispered, the reality of it settling into my bones like the subterranean cold. Silas nodded slowly. "People do terrible things out of greed. But this was personal." He turned back to me, his expression softening with an empathy that felt utterly genuine. "The air in this chamber won't last forever. We need to move." "Move where?" My world had shrunk to this single, rock-sealed room. "Deeper in," he said. "There's a whole system of passages. I've spent years learning them. One leads to a subterranean river. It flows out to the base of the mountain. It's not an easy path, but it's the only one we have." I stared at him, this ghost of the mountain, this impossible savior. "Why would you help me?" He paused, the lantern light catching the sorrow in his eyes. "Because I know what it's like to be left behind by the person you trust most in the world." He didn't elaborate, but the weight of his words filled the space between us. In that moment, he wasn't a stranger. He was a fellow survivor. I looked from his study, open-faced to the wall of rock that Leo had built. My choice was simple: to stay here and die with my grief, or to follow this quiet man into the heart of the mountain and fight for the chance to live. I pushed myself to my feet, my muscles aching, and gave a single, determined nod. We walked deeper into the earth, my headlamp beam dancing ahead of Silas's lantern flame. The passage he led me through was narrow, the rock walls cool and smooth against my outstretched hands. The air changed, growing thick with the smell of wet minerals and something ancient, like time itself. After a few minutes, the tunnel opened into a surprisingly large cavern. It was a home. Against one wall, shelves fashioned from weathered driftwood were neatly stacked with canned goods, ropes, and spare batteries. A small, carefully constructed fire pit sat beneath a natural fissure in the ceiling that acted as a chimney. A rolled-up sleeping bag and a small stack of books lay in a dry corner. It was a space of profound solitude, a sanctuary carved from the dark. "It's not much," Silas said, setting his lantern on a flat rock. "But it's kept me safe." "You've lived here for years?" I asked, sinking onto a smooth, log-like stone near the fire pit. The scale of his isolation was staggering. He crouched and began to arrange kindling in the pit. "After I lost my family," he said, his voice quiet and even. "There was a landslide up in the North Cascades. My wife, Clara, and our son, Finn, they were hiking a trail I'd told them was safe." He didn't need to say more. The guilt was a living thing in his voice. "I used to be a search and rescue coordinator. I couldn't save my own family. After that, The noise of the world was too much. The silence down here felt more honest. He lit the fire, and the flames leaped to life, pushing back the shadows and casting his face in flickering gold and crimson. The warmth began to seep into my chilled bones. I wrapped my arms around myself, the full force of Leo's betrayal washing over me again. He said he wanted to celebrate, I said, my voice flat and distant. My discovery, the minerals. It's a significant find. Worth a fortune. He saw the money, Silas stated, not as a question, but as a fact. I saw the science, I corrected, looking into the flames. The beauty of it. The story the earth was telling. I thought he could finally be proud of me for who I am, not for the image he created. Silas looked at me, his gaze piercing. You saw purpose. He saw an opportunity. He passed me a tin mug filled with steaming water and a fragrant sprig of some herb. Wild mint tea. It helps with the shock. I took the mug, my hands shaking so badly the liquid sloshed over the rim. The warmth was a small, solid comfort. We sat in silence for a long time, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the ever-present drip of water in some distant passage. We should rest, Silas said finally. We'll leave at first light. The river is a long walk from here. I stared into the dancing flames, my mind a maelstrom of fear and a fledgling, stubborn anger. Do you think we can make it out? He didn't hesitate. We have to, he said, and his certainty was a lifeline. For the first time since the rocks came down, I didn't feel entirely alone. I was no longer just a victim trapped in the dark. I was a survivor with a guide. And somewhere far above us, Leo was walking in the sun, believing me to be a memory he could profit from. The thought ignited a spark of iron resolve in my soul. I would not be his story to tell. We left Silas's sanctuary before the sun had even begun to touch the mountain's peak. He moved with a quiet competence that was deeply reassuring, packing food, a water purifier, and climbing rope into 2 weathered packs. I insisted on carrying my own, my samples tucked safely inside a waterproof pouch. They were no longer just rocks, they were evidence. They were my truth, and I would carry them back into the light. The journey was a descent into an alien world. We moved through passages that twisted and turned, sometimes so narrow we had to inch through sideways. My body, bruised and sore, protested with every step, but I pushed on, focusing on the steady rhythm of Silas's boots ahead of me. The beams of our lights painted fleeting murals on the walls, illuminating curtains of glittering flowstone and formations that looked like frozen, sleeping creatures. There's a crawl space ahead, Silas's voice echoed softly. The locals call it the Needle's Eye. It's about 50 feet long. Stay calm, breathe steady. If you feel panic rising, just stop and call out to me. My stomach tightened. I'd never been claustrophobic, but being buried alive had rewired my brain. He went first, his lean frame disappearing into the tight gap with an ease born of long practice. I took a deep, shaky breath, dropped to my belly, and followed him into the suffocating embrace of the rock. The stone was cold and unforgiving against my chest and back. My own breathing sounded impossibly loud in the confined space. Panic, slick and oily, began to rise in my throat. Talk to me, I managed to whisper, the words scraping my raw throat. His voice came back, calm and close. What about? Anything, I gasped. Tell me about your son. Finn. There was a moment of silence, just the sound of our bodies scraping against stone. Then he spoke. He had his mother's laugh. It was the kind of laugh that made you want to laugh, too, even if you didn't know the joke. He wanted to be an astronaut, but he also wanted to be a farmer. He said he'd grow potatoes on Mars. A small, genuine smile touched my lips. I kept crawling, focusing on the image of a little boy with a big laugh. He loved the stars, Silas continued, his voice a low, steady anchor in the dark. I bought him a telescope for his 7th birthday. We'd sit out on the porch for hours, and I'd point out constellations. Orion, Cassiopeia, the Pleiades. He had them all memorized. He said they were maps for when he traveled through space. The story filled the narrow space, pushing back the panic. It was a gift of trust, a shared piece of his soul. By the time we emerged into a wider cavern, I was breathing evenly again, my fear replaced by a profound sense of connection to the man who was guiding me. The chamber we entered was breathtaking. It was a grotto of impossible beauty, the walls covered in delicate, needle-thin aragonite crystals that sparkled like a million tiny stars in our light. Pools of clear, still water reflected the ceiling, creating an illusion of infinite, crystalline skies above and below us. "Are you all right?" Silas asked, turning to face me. I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. "Thank you for telling me about him. Talking helps keep the dark from getting in," he said simply. We pressed on. As we descended deeper, the air grew humid and the steady dripping of water was slowly replaced by a low, powerful rumble that vibrated through the soles of my boots. "The river," Silas announced. The passage opened abruptly onto a wide, jagged ledge overlooking a chasm. Below, a river of black, churning water surged through the darkness, its roar filling the vast space. It was a display of raw, subterranean power, both terrifying and magnificent. "There's a narrow track along the wall," Silas said, pointing. "It follows the river for about a mile. From there, we have to cross." I looked at the tumultuous water. "Has anyone else ever come this way?" "Just me," he said, his gaze meeting mine. "But today there are two of us." The ledge was treacherous, often no wider than the length of my boot. The spray from the river made the rock slick and dangerous. There were moments I had to fight back a wave of vertigo, my eyes fixed on the rock wall just inches from my face. In the most difficult sections, Silas would turn and offer his hand, his grip firm and steady, a silent promise of safety. I, who had always prided myself on my self-reliance, my ability to navigate the wildest terrain alone, had to accept his help. It was a humbling and necessary lesson in trust. We found a wider alcove to rest. Silas handed me the last of our protein bars and a canteen of purified water. The roar of the river was a constant, deafening companion. "What do you think he's doing now?" I asked, my voice raised over the noise. "Leo." Silas was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the churning water. "He's performing," he said finally. "Crafting the story." The grieving, heroic husband who tried desperately to save his wife from a tragic accident. A bitter taste filled my mouth. "Will they believe him?" "They'll believe what's easiest," Silas replied, his voice grim. "Grief is more palatable than murder. They'll believe him until you walk out of this mountain and give them a different story to tell." I clenched my jaw, the anger a hot, clean fire in my chest. "I will." I patted the pack beside me, feeling the solid weight of the rock samples. "My proof." My voice. Silas watched me, a flicker of something like pride in his eyes. "I know you will." He stood and offered me his hand again. "The crossing is just ahead. It's the hardest part." The ledge disappeared completely, forcing us to wade into the river itself, the water a shocking, icy cold that stole my breath. It surged around my thighs, threatening to pull my feet out from under me. "Stay close to the wall," Silas shouted over the roar. "Find your handholds. Move sideways." We inched our way along, my fingers numb and clumsy as I gripped the slick rock, my leg muscles screaming from the cold and the strain. When we finally pulled ourselves back onto a dry path, I was shaking so hard my teeth chattered. Silas immediately pulled a small, thin blanket from his pack, a Mylar emergency blanket, and wrapped it around my shoulders. The crinkling silver fabric felt like a shield. "Rest here," he said. We huddled together in the small, dry space, the shared warmth a small bastion against the immense cold of the mountain's heart. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice trembling. He just nodded, his shoulder pressed against mine. "You're stronger than you think, Cora." I looked at him, at his tired but resolute face, illuminated by the soft glow of his lantern. "So are you, Silas." A faint smile touched his lips, and this time, it reached his eyes. Ahead of us lay the rest of the river, the final crossing, and an unknown path to the surface. But for the first time, I wasn't just thinking about survival. I was thinking about what came after. I wasn't just a geologist who had been betrayed. I was a woman who had walked through the dark heart of the earth and was learning to find her own way back to the light. The final crossing point was a narrow tunnel where the river channeled its full force, creating a churning vortex of black water. "We have to swim for it," Silas said, his voice grimly calm over the roar. "It's a short distance, maybe 20 feet, and the current will push you through. But you can't fight it." I stared at the maelstrom. It looked like a one-way passage to oblivion. "Are you sure?" "The airflow changes here," he explained, his gaze intense. "There's fresh air on the other side. I can feel it. I'll go first, to make sure the passage is clear." He secured our packs in waterproof bags, tying them off with practiced efficiency. He placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip steady and grounding. "Take a deep breath. When you go under, tuck your body and let the river do the work. I will be on the other side waiting for you." And then he was gone, slipping into the black water with a quiet grace that defied the violence of the current. I was alone. The seconds stretched into an eternity. 1 minute. 2. The roar of the water was the only sound. Doubt, cold and sharp, pierced my resolve. What if he was wrong? What if the current had trapped him? Then a splash. Silas surfaced on the far side of the pool, gasping but grinning, his arm raised in a triumphant wave. "It's clear," he shouted. "Come on." Relief washed over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees. I took 3 deep, ragged breaths, held the last one, and plunged into the icy torrent. The world exploded into a chaotic symphony of cold, pressure, and roaring darkness. The current seized me, tumbling me like a stone. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing my body to remain limp, trusting Silas's instructions, trusting him. Just as my lungs began to burn with a desperate fire, I felt the current lessen. I kicked hard, clawing my way upward toward a faint, shimmering light. I broke the surface with a desperate gasp, air filling my aching lungs. Strong hands grabbed me, pulling me from the water and onto a smooth, stone bank. I lay there, coughing and shaking, but deliriously, miraculously alive. "You did it," Silas said, his voice thick with relief as he wrapped the mylar blanket around my shoulders again. I looked up at him and started to laugh, a wild, ragged sound that was half a sob. "Not today," he said softly, and in his eyes, I saw not a rescuer, but a partner. We rested in a dry, quiet cavern, sharing the last of our food. The air here was different. It was fresh, carrying the faint, clean sense of pine and damp soil. Of life. High above, through a fissure, I saw a sliver of impossible blue sky. A few hours later, we climbed the last rocky passage. Silas pushed aside a thick curtain of hanging moss and roots, and I stepped out after him. Sunlight. Warm and brilliant, it spilled over me like a benediction. I closed my eyes, lifting my face to it, feeling its heat on my skin. The world was overwhelmingly vibrant. The deep green of the forest, the impossible blue of the sky, the sound of wind rustling through the leaves of an alder tree. Tears I didn't know I was holding back streamed down my face, washing away the dust and the darkness. Silas stood beside me, his face also turned to the sun. "Welcome back to the world, Cora," he said softly. The walk down the mountain felt surreal. After 3 days underground, every color was brighter, every sound sharper. From a ridge, we could see Havenwood nestled in the valley below, a postcard of peaceful, ordinary life. By late afternoon, dusty, bruised, and looking like apparitions, we walked onto the main street of the town. People stared. We must have been a sight. We made our way to the one place that felt solid and real, the town's small diner. The smell of coffee and frying bacon was the most wonderful thing I had ever experienced. But as I slid into a booth, my eyes fell on the small television mounted in the corner. And there he was. Leo. His face was a mask of handsome, tragic grief. He was standing in front of our house, speaking to a news reporter. "It was a freak accident," he was saying, his voice catching with practiced sorrow. "The cavern was unstable. I did everything I could to get to her, but it was too late. She's gone." The world tilted. The waitress approached our table. "Folks, can I get you something?" Silas spoke, his voice steady. "Where's the sheriff's office?" 2 blocks later, I stood before a bewildered-looking deputy. "My name is Cora Wells," I said, my voice clear and strong. And I need to report an attempted murder. The story spilled out in a small, quiet office. Silas gave his testimony, a calm, factual account that corroborated every detail of mine. I presented my samples, the physical proof of the motive. The sheriff, a weary-looking man named Grant, listened with a growing look of horror. He typed my name into his computer. Then he swore, a sharp, angry sound. "I'll be damned," he said, looking at me. He filed a preliminary death certificate 2 days ago, and a petition to assume control of all intellectual property as the sole surviving spouse. I closed my eyes, a cold fury solidifying within me. He hadn't even waited. "He's meeting with investors from Terra Nova Minerals tomorrow," I said. "Up at the site. He's going to sell them my discovery." Sheriff Grant looked at Silas, then back at me. "Well then," he said, a grim smile touching his lips, "I think we'd better go and interrupt that meeting." The next morning, I sat in the back of an unmarked police car, winding my way back up the same mountain road I had traveled with Leo just days before. I wasn't the same woman. The hope was gone, replaced by an unshakable resolve. I was not a victim returning to the scene of the crime. I was the reckoning. We parked out of sight. Through a pair of binoculars, I could see Leo. He was dressed in a tasteful dark jacket, laughing and gesturing with his familiar, easy charm as he spoke to 2 men in expensive suits. A hidden microphone carried his voice to us. "A tragedy, of course," he was saying. "Cora was brilliant, but reckless. She died doing what she loved. Honoring her legacy by ensuring this discovery benefits humanity is the only thing that gives me comfort." The lead detective, a woman named Kim, gave me a look. "He's good. He's a performer," I replied quietly. "We're moving in," Kim said into her radio. She looked at me. "Ready?" I nodded. I opened the car door and stepped out. The crunch of my boots on the gravel was the only sound. Leo turned first. His smile froze, then dissolved. The color drained from his face, leaving it a waxy, bloodless white. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The 2 investors stared, their expressions a mixture of confusion and shock. "Hello, Leo," I said, my voice even as I walked toward him. The forest around us seemed to be holding its breath. "Surprised to see me?" "Cora," he stammered, taking a stumbling step backward. "But, the cave-in." "The cave-in you caused," I said, stopping a few feet from him. "The one you engineered after you pushed me and told me to be with the earth forever." "You were very poetic." His face crumpled, the mask of the grieving husband shattering to reveal the terrified fraud beneath. I don't know what you're talking about." "We have a witness," Detective Kim said, stepping forward with 2 uniformed officers. "We have your voice on tape from the moment you sealed the cave. We have physical evidence. Leo Wells, you are under arrest for the attempted murder of your wife, Cora Wells, and for filing fraudulent legal documents." Leo didn't fight. He just stood there, his eyes locked on mine, as they cuffed him. He looked at me as if I were a ghost who had clawed her way out of the grave to haunt him. And perhaps, in a way, I was. As they led him away, he turned his head, his voice a desperate whisper. "Cora, I never wanted." "Don't," I said, the single word cutting him off. "You buried me, Leo. But you forgot one thing about geologists. We know how to read the stories hidden in the stone. And we know how to bring them into the light." I watched them put him in the car and drive away. I didn't feel triumph or even hatred. Just a profound, aching emptiness, the feeling of a wound that had finally been cleaned and could now, at last, begin to heal. I found Silas leaning against a fir tree at the edge of the clearing, watching me. "It's done," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "No," he said gently, pushing off the tree and walking toward me. "It's just beginning." He was right. I looked at the entrance to Whisperwind Caverns, now cordoned off with police tape. It was just a place. A collection of rock and earth. It held no power over me anymore. The real prison had been my marriage, the real darkness my refusal to see the truth. And a quiet man with a broken heart had walked into that darkness and shown me the way out. In the weeks that followed, my life slowly began to reassemble itself, but into a new and stronger shape. The charges against Leo were ironclad. My name was restored to the Vega Ridge discovery, as the media had dubbed it, and Terra Nova Minerals, after a public apology, approached me with a partnership offer that gave me full scientific control. Silas did not return to his solitary life in the mountain. He stayed in Havenwood, renting a small cabin on the edge of the forest. He said the silence down in the caves was no longer honest. It had become an excuse to hide. He was a quiet, steady presence in the chaos of my reclaimed life, helping me navigate the legal complexities and the press attention with his calm, grounded wisdom. He never offered advice unless I asked, but he was always there to listen, his presence a silent affirmation that I was not alone. One evening, after a long day of meetings, I found him sitting on my porch, watching the sunset paint the peaks of the Cascades in hues of rose and lavender. I sat down beside him, a comfortable silence settling between us. "I've been thinking," he said, not looking at me but at the mountains. "About what you said in the cave. About seeing the story in the stone." I waited. "I think I spent so long listening to the silence of the earth because I was afraid of the stories people tell," he continued. "They're messy. They hurt. But your story, you brought it out of the dark. You made it true." He finally turned to look at me, his clear eyes holding a depth of understanding that went beyond our shared trauma. It made me think I might be ready to start listening again. A warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the fading sun. For 12 years, I had been an object in someone else's narrative. Now, I was the author of my own. My story was one of rock and darkness and the incredible, resilient strength of the human heart. It was a story of a woman who was buried and found her way out, not just of a cave, but of a life that had been keeping her small. "I'd like that," I said softly. "I think I'm ready to start telling a new one." He smiled, a real, gentle smile that reached his eyes and crinkled the corners. "Where do we start?" I looked out at the mountains, which no longer seemed like a place of secrets and sorrow, but of strength and possibility. "Right here," I said. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the promise of rain. Beside me, Silas's presence was as solid and real as the ancient stone of the peaks before us. We were two people who had been found in the dark, and together, we were choosing to walk forward, step by steady step, into the light. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was truly home.